Hey everyone! Tonight, we begin with a scene that might feel too close for comfort. Imagine the warmth of a Sunday afternoon, the golden Texas light slipping through lace curtains, the faint smell of apple pie cooling on the table, and the quiet creak of an old clock ticking on the wall. Then the door opens. Hey everyone! Tonight, we begin with a scene that might feel too close for comfort. Imagine the warmth of a Sunday afternoon, the golden Texas light slipping through lace curtains, the faint smell of apple pie cooling on the table, and the quiet creak of an old clock ticking on the wall. Then the door opens, and in walks your only son, tall, handsome, a man you once held as a baby. He's smiling, holding a bouquet bright as morning sun. But instead of love, his first words strike like cold glass against your skin. You're still getting the $5,000 every month from Clara. Right. Mom, I just want to make sure you're comfortable. You might not survive this one, so before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I'm doing here. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now, turn off the lights. Maybe let a fan run for some gentle white noise. And let's begin tonight's journey together. I froze when he said it. $5,000. A number that hadn't touched my bank account, my purse, or my hands in nearly 8 months. For all that time, I'd been getting by on church donations, canned beans, dry bread, the occasional bag of vegetables from kind neighbors. My heart thudded like a drum. I tried to steady my voice. Son, the church is helping me get by. David's smile faltered, his brow pinching. And then she appeared, Clara, my daughter-in-law, his wife, dressed in pearl-colored silk, heels clicking against my old wooden floor. Perfume so sharp it cut through the air like mockery. She looked radiant, but her eyes carried no warmth, only frost. Oh, Mother, you must have forgotten, she cooed, her smile sweet as sugar over ice. I bring the money every month. You know how age makes memory slippery. Old age. I'd heard that phrase too many times, soft words meant to cut deep. My hands clenched against my apron, because I remembered everything. Every grocery bill, every prayer scribbled into my worn notebook, every lonely meal eaten with silence. And I knew no one had brought me $5,000. Not once. I didn't argue. Not yet. Some battles aren't meant to be fought in the open. They're meant to simmer in the quiet, like tea steeping in a pot. David tried to soothe the moment, patting my shoulder. It's just a misunderstanding. I'll check the accounts. Mom, I just want you comfortable. His touch was gentle, but inside me, a storm was waking. A mother knows when her son is blind to danger. Clara's hand rested on his shoulder like a claim, her nails painted red, her smile frozen. And in that moment, under the glow of afternoon sunlight spilling across my small living room, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, suspicion sharpened into resolve. Later, after they left, the silence in my house grew heavier than any storm outside. The bouquet still sat on the table, petals bright and mocking. $5,000 a month. 8 months, $40,000. Money that could have fixed my leaky roof, replaced the broken refrigerator, kept me warm in winter. Money meant for me. Stolen. I pulled out an old notebook, the kind where I once kept grocery lists and prayers. With trembling fingers, I wrote 2 lines. Find the truth. Don't trust fake tears. The pen dug into the paper, ink pressing like a vow. I wasn't weak. I had survived loss before my husband's heart attack. Nights of loneliness. The long quiet of aging. And I would survive this betrayal too. That night, as I sat in my dim kitchen with the clock ticking steadily, I made myself a cup of jasmine tea that grew cold on the table. I stared at the shadows on the walls and whispered, Clara, you've underestimated the wrong woman. Old wisdom says you can't choose your family, but you can choose how you face them. And sometimes, facing them means silence. Sometimes it means gathering proof, one quiet line at a time. Did you know that in ancient Rome, mothers who kept household accounts were called matronae rationis? Women of reason. Some historians debate whether they had more power than they were given credit for. I like to think they did. After all, numbers never lie. As I put down my cold teacup, I realized something. I wasn't just Margaret Hayes, a 67-year-old widow scraping by. I was the keeper of memory, and memory is sharper than any knife when it's used to cut through lies. The night ended with me locking away that notebook in my drawer, the vow still fresh in ink. Somewhere out there, Clara was laughing, basking in the perfume of stolen comfort. But I knew what she didn't. The quiet mother she thought was weak had just declared war in silence. After that afternoon, the world felt heavier, like every shadow in my little house carried secrets. I couldn't get Clara's smile out of my mind, too polished, too rehearsed, like a mask glued on with expensive lipstick. The bouquet David had brought sat in a vase by the window. But to me, it looked less like love and more like an apology for something I hadn't yet been told. That night, while the house sighed and creaked, I sat at the kitchen table staring at my old ledger. My hands trembled, but not from age, from clarity. I wrote in neat rows like I had done all my life as an accountant. Groceries, church donations, medication costs. Every cent accounted for. No mysterious deposits. No envelopes of cash. Just silence where $5,000 should have been. The next morning, I walked into First Texas Community Bank, holding my worn passbook. Molly, the young teller with freckles across her nose, looked up kindly. Morning, Mrs. Hayes? I leaned forward, lowering my voice. Sweetheart, would you check if there have been any transfers from David Hayes to my account? He says there's been $5,000 a month for the last 8 months. She frowned, tapping quickly on her keyboard. Then she looked at me with gentle eyes that already told the truth. I'm sorry, Mrs. Hayes. No transfers, just a small interest credit back in February. I thanked her, walked out into the hot Texas sun, and for a moment felt my knees weaken. Not because I was surprised deep down. I already knew, but because confirmation has a weight all its own. Back home, I brewed jasmine tea that turned cold again as I sat unmoving, staring at the clock. Old age teaches you patience, but patience isn't the same as silence. My husband used to say, numbers don't lie. People do. Later that week, Clara came by alone, driving a brand new Lexus that shimmered like a mirror in the driveway. She stepped out in cream linen, sunglasses too large for her face, heels clicking against the porch steps. In her hands, a fancy gift basket tied with a golden ribbon cookies, marmalade, wine, Pretty, yes. Meaningless, absolutely. She smiled, honey over steel. Mother, I thought I'd surprise you. David's been so busy. I poured 2 glasses of iced tea, my voice calm. That's thoughtful. Clara, where's this month's money? The $5,000. For a split second, the mask slipped. Her smile froze. Her eyes darted. Then she let out a brittle laugh. Oh, I must have left it in the car. Silly me. I nodded slowly, glancing at the gleaming Lexus. Nice car? Must have cost a pretty penny. She laughed again, too quickly. Not really. Just an upgrade for my boutique work. Professional image. You know. I stirred my tea, letting silence stretch. Strange, isn't it? That envelopes keep getting left in the car. Her face stiffened before she smoothed it over with another smile. Mother, you don't trust me anymore. Next time, I'll bring the bank receipt. We sat there, cicadas buzzing loudly in the August heat, the porch fan creaking overhead. She didn't drink her tea. After a moment, she stood abruptly. I have to run. Client meeting. I smiled faintly. Of course. Don't forget that envelope in your car. She gave me one last thin smile, eyes flashing with annoyance. You're very sharp, Mother. Her heels struck the steps like the ticking of a countdown clock. Then the Lexus roared to life and rolled away, leaving the scent of expensive perfume hanging in the air. I sat back, the weight pressing against my chest, shifting into something else clarity. She was lying, and now she knew that I knew. That evening, I opened my brown leather notebook and wrote September 10th. Clara came alone. Gift basket. No money. Claimed envelope was in the car. New Lexus. Nervous voice. Left early. My pen carved each word deep into the paper. I had once been underestimated as just a widow, but tonight I was an accountant again, precise, methodical, relentless. Here's the funny thing. Did you know cicadas spend most of their lives underground, only surfacing after 13 or 17 years to sing their truth before dying? Some academics argue that timing is survival. I like to think truth works the same way. Silent for a while, then bursting out when the world least expects it. And in that moment, I realized Clara thought she had buried the truth, but it was only waiting to surface, louder than she could ever silence. The morning after Clara's Lexus visit, I woke before the sun. Old habits die hard, my husband used to say. The day always goes better if you meet it before it's fully awake. I brewed coffee, sat by the window, and watched dawn bleed across the Texas sky in shades of pink and orange. But instead of peace, I felt a restless fire. Her lie echoed in my ears. I left it in the car. I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof. I pulled out my old accounting ledger, the one I had kept back when I was treasurer of the church's women's committee. My handwriting was still sharp, neat rows of numbers. I flipped through page after page. $12 for blood pressure medicine, $24 for electricity, $10 for community dinners at St. Mary's. Each expense was there, every cent accounted for. But no deposits, no mysterious $5,000. The silence in those pages was louder than any accusation. That afternoon, I walked back to the bank. I wanted something official, not just the kindness of a young teller. I asked for a printout. The manager, Mr. Hughes, tapped away at the keyboard, then slid a sheet of paper across the counter. It was clean, sharp, undeniable, no transfers. Fell. I thanked him, tucked the paper into my purse, and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. For a moment, I leaned against the warm brick wall, breathing deeply, trying not to let tears fall. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about dignity. I walked home slowly, the Texas wind tangling in my gray hair. My neighbors waved from their porches, but I barely lifted a hand. I felt like I was carrying a stone inside my chest. That night, I sat at my kitchen table again, lit only by the lamp. I opened my leather notebook and wrote, "Confirmed at bank. No transfers. Clara lying. Must be another account." I thought of Clara's manicured fingers, the diamonds, the polished smile, hands that never worked a day in the heat of a Texas summer. And I thought of mine calloused from years of work, veined, trembling but steady. An old saying from my grandmother drifted back. If you want to see a person's truth, look at their hands. Maybe that's not in any textbook, but it's wiser than most scholars will ever admit. Days passed. Clara came by again, her perfume announcing her before the knock. This time, she brought lavender, claiming it would help me relax. I set the flowers in water, smiled faintly, and said, "My memory is just fine, Clara. Fine enough to remember that the last time you brought me money was never." Her face twitched before the smile snapped back into place. "Oh, Mother, you must be mistaken. The bank must be at fault." I wiped my hands on my apron and met her gaze. I already asked the bank. For a moment, silence pressed down on the porch. Even the sparrows went quiet. She fumbled with her necklace, muttered something about double-checking, and hurried back to her Lexus. I watched her taillights disappear down the street, and a strange calm filled me. That evening, I wrote again in my notebook August 22nd. Clara lied. Nervous. Left early. Proof piling up. But this time, I added something new. If they forged my name, I will find it. Because here's the thing. I wasn't just a mother being lied to. I was an accountant, a keeper of records, a woman who had balanced thousands of dollars without losing a penny. If someone thought they could trick me with numbers, they had chosen the wrong target. Did you know some historians argue that bookkeeping was the first form of literature, that the oldest written records weren't poems or stories, but ledgers of grain and silver? Imagine that civilization itself began with a mother's instinct to keep track. I smiled faintly at the thought. Maybe I was older than I liked to admit, but I still had civilization's first weapon on my side numbers. And numbers, unlike people, never forget. The Texas sun was still low the morning I clipped lavender stems in the yard, their purple blossoms swaying gently in the breeze. The air smelled sweet. Almost too sweet for the heaviness inside my chest. That's when I heard it, the crunch of tires on gravel. Not the rickety sound of a neighbor's pickup, but the smooth purr of something new, expensive. I looked up. A silver Lexus gleamed at the gate, sunlight flashing across its polished hood. My heart tightened. Clara. She stepped out as if she had just stepped off the glossy page of a magazine. Cream linen dress, oversized sunglasses, shoes so shiny they reflected the sky. In one hand, she carried a golden ribboned basket filled with cookies, marmalade, and a bottle of wine. The kind of gift meant to look generous, but never generous enough to hide the rot beneath. She climbed the porch steps with a smile as thin as glass. "Mother, I brought you a little something. David's been busy, so I came in his place." I set my garden shears into the soil and wiped my hands on my apron. "How thoughtful. You two must be very busy." She glanced around, eyes flicking over my porch as though she were inspecting it for flaws. "Oh my, your garden is still so beautiful. I don't know how you manage it all by yourself." "With these hands and a little patience," I replied, holding them up, palms scarred and wrinkled, but steady, hands that still worked, unlike hers, perfect, manicured, untouched by a day's honest labor. She placed the basket on the patio table with exaggerated grace. "Stress isn't good for the memory. Mother, that lavender of yours should help." I poured 2 glasses of iced tea, slid one toward her, and leaned back in my chair. "Clara, let me ask you something. Where's this month's $5,000? For a heartbeat, her mask cracked. Her smile faltered. Her eyes flicked down. Then, quick as a cat, she laughed high, brittle, sharp. "Oh, silly me. I must have left it in the car." I tilted my head, letting silence hang. My gaze drifted toward the Lexus parked in the driveway, fresh with temporary plates. I smiled slowly. "Nice car. Clara. Must have cost quite a bit." She lifted her sunglasses, forcing a chuckle. "Not really. Just an upgrade for work. My boutique requires a professional image." "Of course," I said calmly, swirling the ice in my glass. "A new car for work, but envelopes of cash that always get left behind. Strange pattern, isn't it?" Her face stiffened just a fraction before she covered it again with a dazzling smile. "Oh, Mother, you don't trust me anymore. Next time, I'll bring the receipt." We sat in a heavy silence, cicadas buzzing in the yard like restless violins. She didn't drink her tea. I could see her foot tapping, restless. Then, with a glance at her watch, she stood. "I must run. I'll remind David to resend the money through the bank." I rose with her, following her to the steps. "Don't forget the envelope in your car this time." She froze, just for a second, her smile tightening like thread pulled too taut. "You're very sharp, Mother," she said softly, before her heels clicked down the steps and into the Lexus. The door slammed, the engine purred, and she was gone, leaving nothing but the faint scent of perfume and the echo of lies. I didn't chase her. Instead, I sat back down on the porch and listened to the cicadas again. Their song reminded me of something my husband once said. If someone is lying, you don't have to drag them into the light. Just let them talk long enough, they'll drag themselves. That evening, under the warm glow of my kitchen lamp, I opened my leather notebook. My pen moved firmly across the page, September 10th. Clara came alone. Gift basket. No money. Claimed it was in the car. New Lexus. Freshly bought. Nervous. Avoided eye contact. I closed the notebook and sat still, the silence pressing around me. The funny thing is, did you know lavender has been used for centuries, not just to calm nerves, but to ward off evil in folklore? Some scholars debate whether it worked or whether it was just a superstition. I smiled faintly at the thought. Superstition or not, I needed all the protection I could get, because I finally knew this wasn't forgetfulness. This was theft. And the truth was about to bloom, just like the lavender outside. 3 days later, the sound of a knock at my door startled me. It wasn't the soft tap of a neighbor or the friendly rap of the mailman. This was steady, deliberate, like someone who had made up their mind to enter whether invited or not. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened the door. Standing there was a tall man, gray at the temples, dressed in a charcoal suit that had seen more use than polish. He held a leather briefcase and gave me a polite nod. "Mrs. Hayes, my name is Bennett. I'm the chief accountant at your son's firm." I blinked, surprised. I only spoke with a Sandra from accounting. She mentioned nothing about you. He offered a faint smile, weary but kind. "Sandra is my assistant. She told me about your call and, well, I thought you deserved to see the truth with your own eyes." Something in his voice was different from Clara's polished sweetness or David's tired reassurances. It was steady, like a man who'd wrestled with numbers until they confessed. I invited him in, poured him a glass of water, and we sat at my kitchen table, sunlight falling across the wood. He opened his briefcase and slid a thick folder toward me. "These," he said quietly, "are copies of the last 8 transfers, each for $5,000, $40,000 total, sent by your son, David Hayes, the recipient, an account under the name Margaret Hayes. But," he paused, removing his glasses, "the account isn't yours. It was opened and controlled by Clara Hayes." My hand trembled as I flipped through the pages. Each line was undeniable sender David Hayes. Recipient Clara Hayes. The same date each month. Precise as clockwork. I swallowed hard. "So she forged my name." He nodded gravely. "Yes." She presented an ID copy. "Very convincing. Your son likely signed an authorization without looking closely. It happens more often than you'd believe." I pressed a hand to my chest, the room spinning. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was humiliation, carried out with my own name as the weapon. "And David," I whispered. Bennett sighed. "I don't think he knows. He trusts her with everything: paperwork, accounts, even the company card." "The company card," I repeated. "Yes." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "She's been charging personal expenses to the firm. Jewelry, spas, flights. Even the down payment for that new Lexus. Over $30,000 in just 3 months. The words rattled through me like hail on a tin roof. Spa visits, jewelry, vacations. While I'd been thanking God for donated loaves of bread, I looked at him, my voice thin but steady. "Mr. Bennett, if I want to expose this, will you help me?" He met my gaze, his blue-gray eyes clear. "Mrs. Hayes, I believe in numbers, and I believe in justice. I'll help, but we must prepare carefully. Clara is clever. She'll twist the story if we're not thorough." A strange calm settled over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't alone. "Then we'll be thorough," I said. Bennett gave me a faint, grim smile. "You remind me of my mother. She used to say, 'Truth is patient. It doesn't mind waiting for the right moment.'" I chuckled softly. That sounds like something my husband would have said after he left. I sat staring at the folder, the papers like cold steel against my table. $40,000 in black and white. But more than money. It was my son's trust siphoned off month by month by the woman he believed loved him. That night, I opened my leather notebook again and wrote September 11th. Bennett came. 8 transfers. $5,000 each. All went to Clara. She forged documents. Also used company card. David in the dark. I have an ally. The fight begins. And as I set down my pen, I whispered into the empty kitchen. Clara, you thought I was just an old woman counting canned beans. But I was an accountant before you were even born. And now the numbers will speak louder than your perfume. Did you know the oldest surviving check in American banking history was written in 1790 for exactly $1.35? Some scholars argue it was symbolic, a small transaction carrying a large truth. I smiled at the thought, because tonight, my truth wasn't small. It was $40,000 strong. By the time Bennett left me with that thick folder of transfers, I felt both lighter and heavier all at once. Lighter because the fog of doubt had finally lifted. And heavier because the truth now had weight pages of numbers that couldn't be denied. I spent that night pacing the kitchen, my slippers brushing against the worn wooden floor, the ticking clock reminding me of each second slipping by. I wasn't ready to confront David yet, not without a plan. Clara was too clever, too smooth with her lies. If I came at her with rage, she'd twist it, paint me as senile, confuse my son until I was the villain in my own story. So I did what any good accountant does. I set a trap. I called David the next morning. He sounded tired, his voice muffled as though he was already halfway inside another meeting. Mom, I'm sorry I haven't called more. Clara says she's been visiting you, right? I smiled faintly into the phone. She has, son. She's very thoughtful. I was thinking of inviting you both to dinner this Sunday. It's been too long since we've had a proper meal together. David brightened immediately. I'd love that. Clara too. She'll be thrilled. Good, I said, my tone calm, even warm. But inside, I was coiling the rope of silence into a noose she wouldn't see until it was around her neck. That Sunday, I set the table with my husband's old silverware polished until it gleamed. I roasted chicken with honey glaze, whipped mashed potatoes, tossed apple walnut salad, and of course, baked David's favorite apple pie. The house smelled like memory, like childhood, like a home untouched by lies. At 6 sharp, I heard the smooth engine of Clara's Lexus purr into the driveway. She stepped out in a jade green silk dress, hair flowing in soft waves, the faint scent of Dior trailing behind her like smoke. David followed with a bouquet of lilies, smiling wide. Mom, you look great. I took the flowers, placed them in water, and kissed his cheek. I'm better than ever, son. Thanks to God's grace and the two of you. Clara smiled. That smug little curl of her lips I had come to know too well. She thought the evening belonged to her. We ate, laughed lightly, spoke of neighbors and weather, while candlelight flickered gently against the walls. I let them both relax, Clara especially. She needed to believe she was safe. And then, just as David took another bite of chicken, I set down my fork. I truly appreciate you both, I said softly, especially for this month's $5,000. It's already made such a difference. Clara didn't miss a beat. She flashed her smile and lifted her wine glass. Oh, Mother, please don't be so formal. I'm just doing what I should. I nodded, pretending to blush. I'm thrilled. I just bought a new heater. Texas gets chilly earlier these days. Her smile widened, and she tilted her head toward David as if to say, See, everything's fine. That's when I asked it lightly, almost as if I'd forgotten myself. Just curious. Clara, what day do you usually send it? She answered instantly, too quickly. The 10th. Mother, always the 10th. David paused, brow furrowing. Wait, not the 10th. Honey, I set the auto transfer for the 15th. The room went still. Do you know that silence, the kind where a lie finally runs headfirst into a wall? It's almost beautiful. Clara blinked rapidly, her laugh brittle. Oh, I thought you said the 10th. David shook his head firmly. No, the 15th. I remember because payroll hits that day. I smiled gently, sipping my tea. Wonderful. Then I'll go to the bank on the 15th to make sure it's posted correctly. Clara's hand trembled just enough to make her wine glass clink against the plate. Oh, Mother, you're so careful. David glanced at her, suspicion flickering in his eyes. For the first time, he wasn't looking at me like the forgetful widow. He was looking at her like he didn't quite recognize her. The rest of the dinner moved along stiffly. Clara tried to change the subject, asking about neighbors, commenting on the pie, but her eyes darted nervously with each word. When dessert was finished, they stood to leave. David hugged me tightly, but his eyes were clouded, stormy. Clara forced her smile once more. Thank you for dinner, Mother. We'll see you soon. At the door, I replied softly. Yes. And don't worry, I'll check the bank on the 15th. Her smile faltered, just for a second. When the Lexus disappeared down the road, I sat alone in the candlelit silence. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. What I felt was pure, clean calm, because Clara had just walked right into my trap. That night, I sat at my desk, the glow of my old lamp catching my husband's photo frame. I typed an email slowly, deliberately, to the only two people I trusted: Bennett, the honest accountant, and Amelia Rowe, my old college friend turned financial fraud lawyer. Subject: it's time to begin. Bennett, Amelia, everything's ready. Clara contradicted David at dinner about the transfer date. She thinks I believe her, but she doesn't realize she's already exposed herself. Please prepare the files and comparison reports by the 15th. It's time to let her self-destruct. I clicked send and leaned back. Outside, the crickets sang their steady song, as though counting down the days with me. Did you know that chess masters sometimes call the quiet, waiting moves poisoned gifts? A simple pawn moved forward, harmless looking, until the opponent bites and poisons themselves. Some argue that's the purest form of strategy. I think I'd agree, because tonight, Clara had just taken the poisoned gift, and the game was mine to finish. The following days stretched long and quiet, like the hush before a storm. I woke early, brewed my tea, and tended to the lavender garden, but my mind wasn't on the plants. It was on the folder Bennett had given me, on the emails waiting in my outbox, on the trap already tightening around Clara. On the evening of the 13th, Bennett replied in his usual brief style, confirmed with bank. Account under your name opened by Clara with forged documents. All transfers matched. Will prepare condensed summary for David. Amelia working on legal groundwork. B. A shiver ran through me. Proof was no longer just suspicion in my notebook. It was real, official, undeniable. The next morning, my phone rang. Amelia's calm, crisp voice filled my ear. Margaret, I've reviewed everything Bennett sent. It's solid. This is textbook elder financial exploitation. We can take it to court whenever you're ready. I paused, staring out at the morning sun. Not yet. I don't want a courtroom to show David the truth before his own eyes do. I need him to see her lies unravel in person. Amelia hesitated, then softened. You're right. Sometimes justice is more powerful when it's personal. How do you want to do it? I'll need a setting, I said slowly. Something that feels natural. Reverend Cole could help arrange a small charity dinner. A pretext that will bring David and Clara without suspicion. Amelia chuckled knowingly. A staged night, with witnesses and evidence right in front of them. Clever, Margaret. Very clever. That evening, I walked to St. Mary's Church. The old stone steps glowed red in the dusk, the bell tower casting long shadows across the street. Inside, I found Reverend Cole stacking chairs in the hall. He looked up, smiling kindly. Mrs. Hayes, you look determined tonight. I am, I said, lowering my voice. I explained everything: the transfers, the forged account, Clara's lies. His gentle eyes filled with sorrow as he listened, but when I finished, he nodded firmly. Sometimes the Lord doesn't send thunder, Margaret, he said. Sometimes he gives you the quiet strength to reveal sin in the simplest light. I placed my hand over his. I don't want revenge. I just want my son to see. And he will, Reverend Cole said softly. I'll help however I can. When I returned home, the air was thick with Texas heat, but my heart felt lighter. I sat at the kitchen table, spread Bennett's folder wide across the wood, and began marking the key lines in red ink. Transfers, dates, forged authorizations, spa bills, flights, jewelry receipts. Each mark felt like hammering a nail into the coffin of Clara's lies. Then I slipped them all into a large beige envelope. On the front, in neat letters, I wrote donation documents, Senior Assistance Fund. It was a simple disguise, but that envelope would sit on the table like an uninvited guest, waiting for Clara to meet her reflection in black and white. Did you know that in medieval courts, accountants were often called silent judges? Their ledgers decided disputes when memory failed. Some argue they had more power than the kings themselves. It's a debatable phrase, but one I find comforting. Numbers don't forget. And neither did I. That night, under the lamplight, I opened my leather notebook and wrote September 10th. Bennett and Amelia prepared files. Reverend Cole will host charity dinner. Envelope ready. Clara walking into her own downfall. My hands tremble, not from fear, but from justice waiting to speak. I closed the book, blew out the lamp, and sat in the quiet glow of moonlight streaming across my kitchen floor. The house was still, but inside me, I felt the steady heartbeat of resolve. The truth was no longer just waiting. It was coming quiet, steady, inevitable. The night of the charity dinner arrived sooner than I expected. I'd spent the whole day preparing, not because I wanted the food to impress, but because I knew the details mattered. The house had to feel ordinary, safe, warm. Clara had to walk in believing she still controlled the stage. Only then would the mask crack. I simmered beef stew with red wine and rosemary, the same dish David had begged for on his birthdays. The air filled with its earthy scent, heavy and comforting. A white cloth stretched across the dining table, porcelain plates laid neatly, candles flickering gently. And in the center, Waiting like a coiled truth sat the beige envelope labeled simply Donation Documents. Senior Assistance Fund. At exactly 7, the silver Lexus purred into the driveway. Through the window, I saw Clara step out first, dressed in pale pink silk, pearls gleaming at her throat. She smiled at David as though nothing in the world could shake her. My son followed with his usual bouquet white lilies this time, his smile tired but genuine. "Mom, it smells like home in here," he said, hugging me tightly. "I made it for you," I whispered, brushing his cheek. Clara floated in behind him, her voice sweet and polished. "Oh, how cozy. You always make dinner feel special, Mother." "Yes," I replied softly, eyes flicking to the envelope on the table. "Tonight will be very special." Minutes later, Reverend Cole arrived, carrying a second white envelope in his hands. He smiled apologetically. "Sorry I'm late. Here are those donation papers you asked me to bring." He set them on the table beside the beige one. Clara's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "So it really is a charity dinner. I thought you were joking." I poured wine for them all, my voice calm, smooth. A dinner about trust, giving, and honesty. David raised his glass, oblivious to the storm brewing. Clara clinked hers too, her pearl bracelet sliding against the stem. As we ate, conversation fluttered around weather and neighbors, the church garden, even David's latest project at work. I waited until the warmth of wine and candlelight had settled them into ease. Then, when the stew bowls were empty and the plates cleared, I slid the beige envelope into the center of the table. "Son," I said softly, "this is a list of all the donations I've received over the last 8 months. I think you should take a look." David frowned, confused. "Donations? Mom, I've been sending you money every month." I pushed the paper toward him. The bold black print was unmistakable recipient, Clara Hayes. Amount, $5,000. Date, 10th of each month. Oh, his face paled. He looked at Clara, eyes searching. "Honey, what is this?" Clara leaned forward quickly, her smile brittle. "Oh, that must be some mix-up. Mother's been getting the money." "Of course. Banks mislabel names all the time." I didn't blink. "Is that so? Then what about this spa bill, 1 to 200 in Houston? Also charged to the secondary card under your name? Was that a bank mistake too?" For the first time, Clara faltered. Her lips parted, her eyes darted. Then she forced a laugh. "Oh dear. Maybe someone used my name by accident." Before she could finish, a voice cut across the room, deep, firm, unshaken. "No, Mrs. Hayes. No one used your name by accident." We all turned. Bennett stood at the doorway, holding another stack of papers. I had asked him to come, though no one else knew. David looked confused. "Who are you?" "I'm Bennett," he said, stepping forward. "Chief accountant at your firm. The one your mother authorized to investigate the transfers." The air snapped still. I rose slowly, my eyes fixed on Clara. 8 transfers, $5,000 each. Every one went to your account, and not once did they reach me. David stared at his wife, voice breaking. "Clara, is this true?" Her mask shattered. Tears welled up as she reached for him. I just borrowed it. I was going to put it back. I didn't want to upset your mother." I sighed, the sound carrying years of weariness. Borrowing doesn't involve forged accounts or fake signatures, mseh. David's hands trembled as he pulled away. I sent that money so my mother could live comfortably. Clara, and you... His voice cracked into anger. You spent it on cars and spas while she lived off church food. Clara sobbed, mascara streaking her face. I did it for us. David, I wanted us to look successful. Reverend Cole's voice broke the silence, low but steady. Sometimes God doesn't punish the guilty. He just lets them see their true reflection. I sat back down, my voice calm, almost gentle. Clara, I didn't need the money. I needed respect. And you stole that too. Her sobs turned desperate. Mother, I'm sorry. Please. I never meant to. I cut her off softly. Stop lying. Tonight, the numbers told the story. And numbers never lie. The table went silent except for David's ragged breath. Clara's tears didn't move him this time. His eyes, once blind, were finally open. And as I looked at him, my son caught between betrayal and truth. I felt both sorrow and something sharper release, because at last, Clara's mask had fallen. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper, coffee, and fear. I never thought I'd set foot in one at my age, not for something like this. But there I was, sitting stiffly on a wooden bench, Amelia at my side, her brown coat crisp, her expression sharp as a blade. She had promised me I wouldn't have to say much, that the truth would speak for itself. Clara was already at the defendant's table when we walked in. She wore a fitted black suit and had her hair pulled back tight, like she thought looking serious would wash away the perfume of her lies. A young lawyer sat beside her, nervously rifling through papers. David was there too, sitting behind them, his face pale, hollow, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at her either. When the judge entered and the gavel struck, the sound echoed through me like thunder. Amelia stood first, her voice strong, steady. Your Honor, this case is simple. For 8 consecutive months, the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, diverted $40,000 intended for her mother-in-law by forging documents and opening a fraudulent account in her name. She also charged thousands of dollars to her husband's company card for personal expenses. This is not a mistake. This is deliberate financial exploitation. She laid the evidence out one by one: bank statements, spa receipts, travel invoices, even the Lexus down payment. Each paper hit the judge's desk like a drumbeat. Clara's lawyer stumbled to his feet. Your Honor, my client maintains this was merely a misunderstanding in household finances. Mrs. Hayes is elderly and has shown lapses in memory. It's entirely possible she simply forgot these transfers. That was when Clara lowered her head, her voice trembling, practiced. Your Honor, I never meant to hurt anyone. I brought Mother gifts. I cared for her. Maybe she's just confused. Old age, you understand. I felt my chest tighten, my fingers clench against the wood of the bench. Old age. There it was again, that phrase wielded like a knife, as though years of living were proof of weakness. But Amelia was ready. She pulled out my brown leather notebook, holding it high for the judge to see. Your Honor, Mrs. Hayes documented everything. Dates, visits, exact words spoken by the defendant. 8 months of meticulous notes, every line matching the bank's own transaction records. If this is what you call forgetfulness, then I suggest her memory is sharper than anyone else in this courtroom. A murmur rippled through the room. The judge adjusted his glasses and flipped through the pages. Slowly, his frown deepened. "Mr. Bennett," the judge called. Bennett rose from his seat near the witness stand, his suit neat, his voice calm. "Your Honor, I am Chief Accountant at Hayes & Partners. I confirm that the transfers and reconciliations in this report are authentic. The account under Margaret Hayes's name was in fact opened and controlled by the defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes." The judge nodded, his expression turning stern. Clara's mask cracked, her hands clenched into fists on the table, nails digging into her palms. She whispered something to her lawyer, who looked even more nervous than before. Amelia's voice rang out once more. "Under the Texas Elder Protection Act, this qualifies as elder financial exploitation and marital financial fraud. We request repayment of all funds with interest, court fees, and restriction of the defendant's financial access for a period of 5 years." The judge leaned back, silent for a long moment. The only sound was the ticking of the wall clock. Finally, his voice came firm, clear, final. After reviewing all evidence, testimonies, and documentation, the court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mrs. Margaret Hayes. The defendant, Mrs. Clara Hayes, shall repay $40,000 in full, with interest and court costs. Furthermore, she is stripped of all rights to manage or access her husband's financial accounts for the next 5 years. She will also complete a 6-month financial rehabilitation program. The gavel struck. Once, twice, 3 times. It was over. Clara collapsed into her chair, mascara running, her lawyer trying and failing to comfort her. She turned to David, reaching out desperately. "You have to believe me. I didn't mean—" David's face was stone. He didn't move. He didn't even look at her. For me, the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like release, like finally exhaling after months of holding my breath. But it also ached, because in the courtroom's silence, I realized justice doesn't come without cost. My son's marriage had just shattered like glass, right there before my eyes. Amelia touched my shoulder gently. "You did the right thing. Margaret, you didn't just protect yourself, you saved your son." I nodded faintly, though my lips couldn't quite find a smile. Justice, I thought, was like a double-edged sword. It cut through the chains of lies, but it also severed fragile bonds you wished could have been spared. As I walked out of that courthouse, rain began to fall. Heavy and cold. Drops splattered against the stone steps, soaking into my coat. But inside me, for the first time in months, there was quiet. Not joy, not sorrow, just peace. Because the truth had finally been spoken aloud, and no one, not even Clara, could silence it now. After the gavel fell that day, the courthouse faded behind me, but its echoes stayed. The judgment was final. The numbers had spoken. The lies were laid bare. Yet the victory tasted bitter. I went home, set my purse on the table, and looked around my quiet house. The apple pie smell from last week still lingered faintly in the air. But the laughter of my son, once so familiar, was nowhere. David didn't come inside. He didn't call. He didn't even send a message. Weeks passed like that. The check arrived eventually. A restitution payment of $40,000 deposited into my account. I opened the email from the bank, read the words, "Deposit completed successfully," and stared at the number. I thought it would feel like triumph. Instead, it felt hollow. I used some of it practically. I fixed the leaky roof that had dripped onto my bed during summer storms. I replaced the old curtains in the living room. I finally bought the heater I'd been layering blankets to avoid. But every purchase carried the taste of betrayal. The rest sat untouched, a reminder of a wound. I thought often of David. I imagined him sitting in that empty mansion in Park Cities. Clara's perfume still faint in the curtains. Her voice echoing in the walls like a ghost. I wondered if he hated me for what had happened, or if he hated himself for not seeing it sooner. Nights were the hardest. I'd light a candle on the table beside his childhood photo, the one where he was 10, hair messy, grin wide, holding a soccer ball. I'd whisper, "Son, I didn't want to destroy your marriage. I just wanted you to see." But the photo never answered. In those months, I discovered something justice isn't the same as healing. Winning doesn't stitch the fabric back together. It only keeps it from unraveling further. I found myself volunteering more at St. Mary's, listening to others. An old man whose grandson drained his pension. A woman tricked by her daughter into signing over her home. A widow whose niece stole her Social Security checks. Their voices trembled like mine had once, carrying shame they didn't deserve. And I realized maybe the best way to use Clara's money wasn't on me. It was on them. That was the seed of the Grace Hands Foundation. With Amelia's legal mind, Reverend Cole's community reach, and my stubborn determination, we started small, just 3 desks in the basement of St. Mary's. We called it Helping the Forgotten Find Their Voice Again. The irony wasn't lost on me. Clara had stolen $40,000 from me, and now that same money was being used to give voices back to others who'd been silenced. But even as the foundation grew, my heart ached in its quiet corners. Because while I could save strangers, my son still kept his distance. Some nights, I'd stand at the porch, lavender swaying in the Texas breeze, and think of something my husband once told me: justice is a storm. Maggie, but storms don't build. They only clear the air. The storm had passed, but the rebuilding that was slower, lonelier, and far more complicated. Did you know that in some cultures, storms are seen not as punishment, but as renewal? Scholars still debate whether they destroy or give life. I suppose the truth is both. Clara's storm destroyed my son's marriage. But maybe, just maybe, it could water the seeds of something new. I just didn't know yet if David would ever let me see it. The first rains of spring came soft that year. Not the harsh storms of summer, but a steady whisper against the windows. I sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, the lamplight glowing across the pages where I'd been recording everything. The lavender on the porch swayed in the damp wind, its scent drifting inside, calming and stubborn all at once. That night, there was a knock, not hurried, not demanding, just soft, insistent. My heart stumbled. At this hour, who would come? I opened the door, and there he was, David. He stood in the rain, hair plastered to his forehead, clothes soaked through, eyes red and tired. For a moment, time folded. He looked like a boy again, the same boy who once ran home crying after scraping his knee, clutching at me for comfort. "Mom," he whispered, voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I've been so stupid." Before I could answer, he stepped inside and sank to his knees on the hardwood floor. water pooling around him. His shoulders shook as sobs ripped through him. I let her lie to me. I doubted you. I left you alone. And now she's gone, took what was left of the money, the company funds, everything. She ran off with someone else. I knelt beside him, my hands trembling as I laid them on his shoulders. David, get up, son. Everyone stumbles. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to stay broken. He lifted his head, tears mixing with rain. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I doubted you while you suffered. Mom, I lost everything. I guided him to the sofa, fetched a towel, and dried his hair like I had when he was a child. Each motion was tender, deliberate, as though rushing might break the fragile moment between us. You didn't lose everything, I said softly. You still have yourself. What you choose to do now decides if you'll stand again. We sat by the fireplace, the wood crackling, steam rising from the ginger tea I placed in his hands. He stared into the flames, voice raw. She drained my savings, the accounts, even the retirement I'd built. I thought I was smart. Mom. But I was blind. I stroked his hair gently. Trust isn't weakness. David, it's what makes us human. But when someone betrays that trust, it doesn't make you foolish. It makes them small. He leaned into me, trembling. Mom, I only have you left now. I smiled faintly, tears warming my eyes. Then let's make that enough. For a long time, we sat in silence, just the fire and the rain. Then David whispered, almost afraid of the words, "Can I help with your foundation? I want to do something good, something that matters. Maybe start this weekend." I looked at him, truly looked, and saw sincerity in his tired eyes. My chest tightened, not with pain, but with something close to hope. "Yes, son," I said, "come Saturday. Reverend Cole will be glad to see you. So will I." And in that moment, I knew the storm had finally broken. The house that had echoed with silence for so long was warm again, filled not with Clara's perfume or lies, but with the raw, halting sound of a son returning home. Did you know some historians argue that forgiveness is less about the wrongdoer and more about survival for the one who was wronged? A debatable phrase. Maybe. But as I sat there holding David's hand, I realized it was true. Forgiving him wasn't about excusing the past. It was about freeing us both to begin again. And as the rain drummed gently on the roof, I whispered into the quiet. Truth never arrives late. It only waits until we're ready to face it. Saturday came with a sky so clear it almost felt like the world had been washed clean. David arrived early, carrying 2 cups of coffee and a shy smile. He looked younger somehow, as though shedding Clara's shadow had stripped away years of exhaustion. Inside the basement of St. Mary's, our foundation buzzed with quiet life. 3 desks, an old printer, stacks of folders filled with stories of people who had been tricked, robbed, or silenced. The Grace Hands Foundation wasn't much to look at, but it was breathing, growing proof that something broken could become something whole again. David set the coffees down and rolled up his sleeves. "What needs doing?" "Mom." I handed him a pile of envelopes. Thank you letters. People need to know they're not forgotten. He smiled faintly and got to work. All day. He moved from task to task, filing reports, carrying chairs, listening to Reverend Cole's stories. I watched him carefully, seeing the man he could still be, not the millionaire blinded by appearances, but the boy I had once raised to tell right from wrong. That night, when the last folder was closed, he turned to me. Mom, if it weren't for you, I'd still be drowning in guilt. You saved me. I shook my head gently. No, son. You saved yourself. I just showed you where the truth was hiding. He leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. You know, Clara always told me appearances were everything. But you taught me tonight that appearances mean nothing without honesty. I finally get it. I smiled softly. That's worth more than any restitution. Months passed, and the foundation grew. More people came, sharing their stories of betrayal. Each one was a wound, but each one found healing in the simple act of being believed. And through it all, David stayed by my side weekends spent writing letters, answering phones, even driving to nearby towns to meet elders who needed help. One morning, sunlight streamed through the windows as David handed me a new grant approval letter. His eyes sparkled with pride. Mom, you turned your pain into something powerful. I want to keep helping. I don't care if I never build another company again. I touched his cheek, tears blurring my vision. This is your company now, David. One built on truth, not profit. The seasons turned. Lavender bloomed on the porch, bees humming lazily over the purple blossoms. On quiet evenings, I sat with David, sipping tea as we planned the foundation's next steps. Sometimes, when the house was still, I thought of Clara not with anger anymore, but with a strange gratitude. Her lies had broken us. Yes, but they had also forged something stronger. Did you know that in ancient philosophy, there's a saying that justice doesn't destroy, it transforms? Some scholars argue it's too idealistic. But sitting there with my son, I knew it was true, because out of betrayal had come rebirth. A year later, I was invited to Austin to receive an award, Texas Woman of the Year for social justice. The grand hall was filled with applause as I walked across the stage in a simple light blue dress. Among the crowd, I saw David in the second row, his eyes shining with pride I hadn't seen since he was a boy. At the podium, I spoke softly. I once thought silence was the best revenge. But I learned that when someone steals your trust, you reclaim it not with rage, but with truth. Because truth has a power no punishment ever will. The applause rose, but I didn't look at the crowd. I looked at my son, and in his eyes, I saw forgiveness, rebirth, and love stronger than the lies that once tried to break us. That night, back home, I opened my old leather notebook one last time. On the final page, I wrote, "A mother's greatest victory isn't winning in court. It's teaching her child that honesty is worth more than gold." I closed the book, set it on the table, and lit a small candle. Its flame flickered across the family photo me, my husband, and little David, smiling in the Texas sun. I whispered softly, "Love never dies. It just changes form." And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The story begins on Mother's Day when Margaret Hayes, a 67-year-old widow in Dallas, learns that her son David has been sending $5,000 a month for her support, but she has never seen a dime. Clara, her glamorous daughter-in-law, insists she delivers it, but Margaret knows the truth. For 8 long months, she has survived on food donations from church while Clara parades in new dresses and perfume. Suspicion grows until evidence appears. Bank records show David's transfers were diverted to a fraudulent account in Margaret's name, created by Clara. With the help of Bennett, David's company accountant, and Amelia, an old friend turned fraud lawyer, Margaret begins documenting everything. She lays a trap at a family dinner where Clara contradicts David about transfer dates, exposing her lies. At a staged charity dinner, Reverend Cole present. The truth explodes. Clara's mask shatters as Bennett presents records of forged authorizations and personal luxury spending. David is stunned, his marriage cracking before his eyes. Court soon follows. Clara's lawyer pleads confusion and old age forgetfulness, but Margaret's meticulous journals and Bennett's testimony crush the defense. The judge orders full repayment and strips Clara of financial control. Justice, however, feels bittersweet. Margaret reclaims dignity, but watches her son's marriage dissolve. She channels her restitution into creating the Grace Hands Foundation to help other elders deceived by family. Months later, broken and abandoned by Clara, David returns in tears, seeking forgiveness. Margaret welcomes him, reminding him that trust is never weakness. Only those who abuse it are weak. Together, mother and son rebuild. David joins her foundation, learning honesty the hard way. In time, Margaret is honored publicly for her work, but she cares most about the quiet victory at home, that her son finally understands truth is priceless, and love survives even betrayal.